For this message as we close out this series, Inside and Outside Congruence in the Life of Joseph. And we're going to do that in a message called Just Like Joseph. Now, throughout this series, we've been talking about congruence, and congruence in the dictionary is in agreement or harmony. Geometry. In geometry, it's figures that are identical in form, coinciding exactly when superimposed. And we've asked throughout this series, does your inside match your outside? Do you see yourself the way God sees you? Do you live like God is for you? And throughout the series, we've used this quote from Eugene Peterson: the Christian life is a lifelong practice of attending to the details of congruence. Congruence between ends and means, congruence between what we do and the way we do it, congruence between what is written in Scripture and our living out what is written in Scripture and our living out what is written, congruence between a ship and its prow, congruence between preaching and living, congruence between the sermon and what is lived in both preacher and congregation, the congruence of the Word made flesh in Jesus with what is lived in our flesh. And so we've said throughout, congruence for this series and in the life of Joseph is what we believe is equal to how we live. And in Genesis, in the narrative of Joseph, it's this amazing story of congruence. It begins with pain he experienced at 17 and doesn't get healed until he's 37. And he's a prototype for our Messiah, Yeshua. And he learns over the 20 years how to make his inside and his outside match. And you remember a few of the messages in this series, I talked about the secret things and how confusing secret things are, because one of the problems in our culture is everyone wants the secret things, secret cell, mystery cells. And it comes in Deuteronomy 29, verse 28. It says, the secret things belong to Adonai our God, but the things revealed belong to us and our children forever in order to do all the words of this Torah. And everybody wants the secret things. The secret things don't belong to us. The secret things are distractions from the things that are already revealed. And the things revealed belong to us in order to do all the words of this Torah. And when we focus on secret things, we miss the things revealed that enable us to change. At the same time, we have to focus our thoughts and our prayers and our decisions on what we see rather than trusting that God is actually in control of the things that we can't see. Paul says it this way in the New Testament to the people of Corinth. He says, we do not lose heart. Though our outward man is decaying, yet our inward man is renewed day by day. For our trouble, light and momentary, is producing for us an eternal weight of glory far beyond all comparison. As we look not at what can be seen, but as what cannot be seen. For what can be seen is temporary, but what cannot be seen is eternal. And I've thought about this throughout the series and in regards to the pandemic that we've experienced in this world, is the things that are seen, the things that feel so important and so necessary are really all temporary things. And the fear and the anxiety is even temporary. And what God has given us everything we need to focus on the things that cannot be seen, which affect our eternity. I've used several times now Mr. Rogers, who in a TV interview was asked what is essential. And this is what Fred Rogers said. He said, what's essential, just like Paul, what is essential is invisible to the eye. And what we see is rarely what is essential. What is behind your face is essential. And the things that are center stage are really the things that are most important. It's usually what happens in the wings. This is the whole narrative of Joseph as we've walked through this series. And in this series, we want to learn to be just like Joseph. So as we go through really kind of a summary of all the messages, every time in the first message, every time God subtracts, he also adds. Joseph loses a lot, but his name literally means God will add. But there's this gap between the losses and the wins, the subtractions and the additions. When God takes away, God also adds, but often those subtractions and additions are years apart. Why? Well, because there's a gap between revelation and transformation. There's this intentional work that takes time once you realize what needs to change. There are ups and downs. There's good and bad. There's the experience of having to repeat things and not repeat and keep returning to your vomit and eating it, because it's the process of learning what actually has to change. And during those ups and downs, you sometimes get the shechem kicked out of you, not realizing that the suffering you're experiencing and how you come through it will become a part of your family's inheritance. We want to forget the hard things. We want to live in the past. You remember my buddy Timon said, when the world turns its back on you, you turn your back on the world. But no, Timon, that's not how it works. You don't forget, and you will be fruitful. Because God is with you, and if he's with you, why are you so afraid? See, it's easy to believe that it's not just about you, but we make it about just us all of the time because, I said last week, because we're dumb. So as we close this series on congruence of Joseph and learn to match our inside and our outside, we need to understand how to persevere like Joseph. How can we be just like Joseph? As a process through my own counseling. And I asked my counselor this question probably a year and a half ago. I asked him, as many of you know, my dad is also a Messianic rabbi, and he raised me and my brothers to be Messianic rabbis. And it was a lot about legacy. And I love my dad. My dad's still doing the things that make him great. But as a kid, it was hard for me to understand. And even now as an adult, I had to ask the question, did I become a rabbi because God wanted me to? Or because I felt like I had to fulfill my dad's legacy? And her answer to me was probably both. And I found, as I've processed this over the last few years, that everything, so many things in our lives are either or. We say, well, if this thing is true, like it could either be that I became a rabbi because God wanted me to, or because of the negative side of feeling like I had to fulfill my dad's legacy. But what if it's both at the same time? And that's why I want to show you how to switch from either or to both and. That in most cases, things are not either or, this is true, or this is true. It's actually, two things can be true at the same time. You know, in Judaism, we jokingly say, and I've used the joke many times over 20 years of ministry, that we say wherever there are two Jews, there are three opinions. But this joke actually demonstrates a truth in how Jewish thinking works. We are generally not interested in Judaism in answers as much as we are in questions. And the answers, unlike our counterparts in American Christianity, answers are not the goal, because some things are mysteries. And they belong to God. So what do we do with the things we can't know? Well, when there's two opinions, the reason why the joke is where there are two Jews, there's three opinions, it's because there's always a third way. There's this opinion and there's that opinion, and it comes from understanding the first two opinions, and based on those first two opinions, creating another way. A third way. We ask ourselves what seem to be very concrete questions, but what if the answer to our questions is not either or, but rather both and? One rabbi says this, and another rabbi says that. Well, maybe they're both right. Or we say on the one hand, or the other, like this guy. On the one hand, you have this, and on the other, you have that. And, they're both kind of true. And that's because there's often not simple answers to our questions, especially of morality, because questions are situational. It's wrong to murder and to bear false witness. But if you're hiding someone from murderers and they come to your door and ask if you're hiding someone that they want to murder, what is one to do, morally speaking? Do you give up the one you're hiding to not bear false witness, or keep hiding the person to not commit murder? And the truth is, there's a third way. The third way is there are less concrete answers to difficult questions than we think they are. And in different times, in different places, and in different situations, the answer isn't always the same. And that's because things are not either or. They're both and. We have to stop looking at things like they are either or. There's a third way that comes from leaving behind the either ors and focusing on the both and. Let me give you some examples so it can make more sense to you of how you can have both. You can have both hard work and rest. You need self-discipline and self-compassion. You need solitude and community. You need both happiness and sadness. You can have both at the same time. You could have strength and weakness. In some situations, you could be both insecure and secure at the same time. Like, for instance, the pandemic is scary and God is actually in control. But you have to be able to wrestle with both. You can just say, God is in control to try to avoid the fear and anxiety that you're feeling. Or you can own that it is scary and there is fear. And most of us don't know what to do. And also, God is in control at the same time. It's both true that the world is falling apart and it's also not. We say all the time, well, this is like the worst in history. But what I've found is most people don't know history. And when you go back into history and you look, there were just as awful things before. Like there was a pandemic 100 years earlier that was way worse because they didn't have the medicine that we have. They didn't have the technology that we had. They were much more isolated than we are. It's just in our lifetime, this is the most difficult. And it is, but also, well, it's also not. Because there's some good things that come from when everything changes around you. I mean, I've wrestled for myself, even during this pandemic, that you could be both a good leader and not make good decisions at the same time. Making bad decisions doesn't necessarily make you a bad leader. You could be a good leader who sometimes makes bad decisions or does not make good decisions, and you have to own when you don't make a good decision. Like you could be a great mom and also at the same time have really hard days with your kids and not like them at all. You could be a great husband and frustrate your wife until she's so angry that she doesn't even want to look at you. But they could both be true at the same time. It doesn't mean you're not great. It just means you weren't great in that moment. You could be a great kid and still at the very same time aggravate your parents until they want to kill you. But it doesn't mean you're not great. It doesn't mean you're not a good person. It doesn't mean you're not a good kid. You could both hate your job and love your job at the same time. Because there's things we hate about our jobs, but there's things we love about our jobs. There are so many things that we look at in our lives as either or, but most of the time, it's both and. There are two things that are opposite of each other that are true at the same time. Like, you're not enough right now. You are enough right now. And you can also be better at the same time. So I want to encourage you, as I've been, the hardest part of writing these sermons and even talking about congruence, and you quote the Eugene Peterson quote, is, the goal is to get congruence between the Word of God and the way that I preach it and make sure that it's congruent in me, and it's not. And that's the struggle. It doesn't mean you can't preach it, but you have to try to actually live what you're preaching. And I want to stop, and I want to encourage you to stop with the either or and live in the both and. Because it's a third way that comes from leaving behind all the concreteness of childhood. It either is this or this. And you find as you get older and you grow and have your own families that, man, there's a lot of things that are true at the same time that are all hard at the same time. I think with that in mind, I found that this question, why do we compare ourselves to Joseph in his suffering but not in his success? We read the story and we think, yeah, I've suffered that way too. But we don't see how much success God actually gave him, even in the midst of his suffering. And sure, we suffer. You realize, as a Jewish believer, and I realize in raising my own kids from my own childhood, that every Jewish person, I think, in this world assumes, because of history, that even if things are going well in the United States of America, at some point, they're also going to turn against the Jewish people. Because it's the history of how things work. And so we're grateful for the good things, the religious freedoms, and the great things that we get about America. But there's also a piece of us that realizes it's probably not going to last because it never has. And that's not the promise from God that it'll last here. The promise is we will be gathered to him where we won't have to worry about it anymore. And yes, we all suffer in all different kinds of ways. There's nobody that likes this pandemic. There's things we like from it, and there's things that we hate from it, and everybody's is different because we all have different personalities, but we all suffer through hard things, and we all are currently going through hard things, and we will go through more hard things. But if God is with us the way he's with Joseph, then everything we do can succeed because God is with us. We just have to adjust our definition of success. We've said throughout this series, we're called to faithful and sincere hearts, not to the image of success that we have in our heads, just like Joseph. And just like Joseph, we can both suffer and have success at the same time. My spiritual grandfather, Johnny Otto, says it like this: God will fix a fix to fix you so that you will be fixed. God sets things up that we blame on ourselves, we blame on other people, we blame on Satan, and really God is working things in a way so that we cannot run away from the giant plank that's sticking out of our eye, like we talked about last time. And as he was dying, Jacob prayed over, he blessed all of his sons at the end of the Genesis narrative, and he gave a blessing to each of his sons. But I want to show you the blessing that he prayed over Joseph. He said this: a fruitful son is Joseph, a fruitful son beside a spring. Daughters walk along a wall, and the archers were bitter and shot arrows and were hostile towards him. Yet his bow was always filled, and his arms quick-moving by the hands of the mighty one of Jacob. From there, shepherd, the stone of Israel, from the God of your father who helps you, and Shaddai who blesses you, with blessing of heavens above, blessing of the deep that lies below, blessings of breast and womb. The blessing of your father surpass the blessing of the ancient mountains, the desire of the everlasting hills. May they be upon Joseph's head, upon the crown of the one set apart from his brothers. See, Joseph knew the whole time, even in life's ups and downs, that it really wasn't about him, and it was about the God of Israel showing himself to the world. It was about Joseph saving his family and the whole world from famine. But remember, all through the narrative of Joseph, it says, and the Lord was with Joseph. And I want you to know, and I'm trying to learn this for myself, that if the creator of the universe is with you, and you know that, then shouldn't it change the way we choose to live? If God is not against you, if God is not teaching you lessons to give you what you deserve, if God is not holding your past over you to remind you how bad you really are, then why do we choose the fear and anxieties that we choose? Why do we keep trying to control the things we can't control? The truth is, just like Joseph, God is with you. He is with you. He loves you. He likes you. And it's time you felt the same way about yourself. It's why Paul says with confidence in 2 Corinthians to the people in Corinth, even where we started, he says in verse 8, 2 Corinthians 4 and verse 8, we are hard pressed in every way, but not crushed, perplexed yet not in despair, persecuted yet not forsaken, struck down yet not destroyed, always carrying in the body the death of Yeshua, so that the life of Yeshua may also be revealed in our mortal body. For we who live are always being handed over to death for Yeshua's sake, so that the life of Yeshua may be revealed in our mortal body. I love handed over to death for Yeshua's sake. so that the life of Yeshua may be revealed in our mortal body. Remember all the way back when Joseph was thrown in the pit. He was thrown in a pit as a burial place. But that pit became an inheritance to his children. And there's no resurrection without death. You can't have resurrection without death. And there are narratives in your head that you need to put to death, that I am trying to put to death for me. And it's a struggle. But all these momentary struggles will not compare with our eternal home with Yeshua. But the struggles prepare us, even in this life, for greater things. You know, I've seen jokes and memes. I know you've seen it too at the start of a new year. You see them all the time. But in particular, because of the pandemic, like I saw this one. Nobody claimed 2022 is your year. We're all going to walk in real slow. Be good, be quiet, be cautious and respectful, and do not touch anything. It's funny. It's also nonsense. You can't jinx what God is going to do in 2022. You didn't jinx what he did in the 2 years previous. We can't change God's plans. God is moving, and he wants us to move with him. And just like Joseph, he is with you. He is with me. He is with us. And he has not destined us to suffer because we deserve it. He wants to use your suffering to build in you a trust that he will never leave you or forsake you, that he hasn't left you yet, and he won't leave you now. I want to encourage you to embrace the strength and the success of Joseph, not just the suffering, because we serve and follow the same God who was with him, and he is with you. So I want to ask you, wherever you're watching, to stand up. And I want to ask you to stand where you are, and I want to pray over you a blessing that I mapped out after the blessing of Joseph. And I want to pray it over you. Because I want to see God do more than you can hope or imagine in 2022. I want to see him do that in my life and my wife's life and my children's life and the life of our congregation here in Seattle and the life of everybody who watches from wherever you're watching from. So I want you to stand and receive this blessing over you. Lord God, would you make my friend a fruitful child of the Most High God? The archers were bitter and shot arrows and were hostile towards them. But their bow is always filled, and their arms are quick moving by the hands of the mighty one of Jacob. It's the rock of Israel, Yeshua our Messiah, the God of your Father who helps you. It is the great I Am who blesses you with blessings of the heavens above and blessings of the deep that lies below, blessings of sustenance and support. May everything you put your hand to succeed. And may you serve God with a faithful and sincere heart in these difficult days. From Numbers chapter 6 and verse 24, Adonai, may the Lord bless you and keep you. Make his face to shine upon you and be gracious to you. And may Adonai turn his face towards you and grant you peace. And I want to pray that over you, chant that over you in Hebrew as well. Yivarechech Adonai ve'yishmerecha Yo'er Adonai panav elecha v'chunecha Yisei Adonai panav elecha v'yasem lecha shalom. The best is yet to come for you, for your marriage, for your family, for your job, for everything that you put your hands to, just like Joseph. I love you guys, and I'm so blessed that you would connect with us in the way that you do, and we'll see you next week.